In today's video, we are going to broach the sensitive topic of what will the roles of those who identify as men and women be during a socio-technological regression, also known as societal collapse, a civilization-ending event, or simply the end of the world as we know it. So let's get to it. What is socio-technological regression? This is a downgrade of living conditions, a stagnation or reduction in the technological complexity and/or the reduction in the administration of the rule of law after a collapse scenario which is induced by one or multiple events. Essentially, it's the end of the world as we know it. For example, a socio-technological regression in the context of an economic collapse may see the available jobs in the job market significantly reduced, forcing a lot of people out of work and an overall restructuring of society. During rapid civil unrest, law enforcement may be drastically reduced in its ability to uphold the rule of law. Or if there was a global conflict, this might require a complete restructuring of the workforce and a significant downgrade in the standard of living. Or a solar flare may cause a significant decomplexifying of society, making many jobs unworkable as society begins to drift into lawlessness and chaos. Societal collapse doesn't mean a complete reversion to the Dark Ages. It just means that there is a significant downgrade in the standard of living and the complexity in how society leverages technology in order to thrive. Within these conditions then, how will the roles of those who identify as men and women change? I was recently watching the TV series The Last Man, and it got me thinking about this very issue. The plot takes place in an apocalyptic world where all the men have suddenly died, and the women must now maintain civilization while finding a way to genetically engineer their progeny. This age-old debate of gender roles, post-SHTF, presented itself, and I decided to revisit the topic once again today. Now, while everyone should be assessed on their own merits on an individual basis, and while it can be dangerous to speak in terms of generalities, it is also dangerous for both men and women to be completely oblivious to the general tendencies of the sexes in various different contexts, their predispositions, and their strengths and weaknesses. In today's video, I'm likely going to challenge people's views from all ends of this debate about what the roles of the sexes and genders will be after it hits the fan. Technological and cultural advances have helped to equalize the playing field between the sexes. For example, in North America, 81% of women are in the workforce versus 91% of men. While there's still a gap there that needs to be closed, these are for the most part at parity when you consider things like maternity leave. And while the careers that they tend to go into still may differ significantly, this still far exceeds women's participation in the workforce in the 1950s, which was around 20 to 25%. Even in terms of physical strength, technology is closing many gaps and is increasingly becoming an equalizer in this respect. As humanity's physical shortcomings are compensated by technology, it may only be a matter of time before the physical differences between men and women largely become redundant. For example, in states where women can carry firearms for self-defense, they are in these situations as capable of defending themselves as men. Add in some intensive self-defense training and the advantage of being a male is drastically diminished. If one wanted to, you could even view hormonal therapy as a form of equalizing technology in this respect. But the question is, what is going to happen to gender roles after the proverbial shit hits the fan? Now bear in mind, it's not about who is better or who even contributes more, if it's even possible to equally weigh these contributions. It's about how do men and women work together to survive and thrive in these suboptimal conditions. So in no way, shape, or form am I making any value judgments about the sexes, nor are the musings in this video a result of my own personal preferences. This is a sincere attempt to objectively understand what the differences between people who identify as men and women will be if society collapses. Now first, we must address a common misconception about women throughout history. See, women were not as helpless and non-contributing to society as many historians would lead us to believe. While it is true that women in many cultures were barred from partaking in numerous aspects of society, and of course, unfortunately, still to this day that is the case in some cultures, their contributions to the functioning of those societies was vital nonetheless. In fact, the whole subservient, domesticated housewife archetype is largely the creation of post-industrial civilization. Prior to this, women's contributions were as laborious as men's in many respects. Think about the pioneers who made their way across the Midwest in the 16th, 17th, and 1800s. It's not uncommon for women who come from these agrarian environments to be exceptionally independent. They have to handle horses, operate machinery, they work in the fields, just like the men. And this is because they largely had no choice. Their survival relied on it. Just like during World War II, when the inclusion of women into the workplace to supplement the men who were fighting overseas was something that came without much resistance. The notion of the helpless damsel in distress with an apron and a feather duster is starkly contrasted against the old country style of woman who could carry a 60-pound jug of water on her head, haul lumber, chop wood, slaughter animals, and bale hay. This is likely to be the true natural disposition of most people who identify as women after it hits the fan. If we are talking about survival, it's going to be all hands on deck. There will be no allowances for people wanting to assimilate into any imaginary roles to appease people's egos. Everyone is going to have to contribute to the maximal amount on their own merits. And while some, particularly those who might be pregnant, may be limited in terms of the physical work that they actually take on, as that might put their health at risk, their actual contribution to the grimy and sweaty, laborious existence that would accompany a post-collapse scenario would be much greater than a lot of people think. Women are on average said to possess 35 to 70% the upper body strength as men, and around 75% the lower body strength as men. And while that might seem like a lot, just remember that a gorilla is 700% stronger than both men and women. In fact, if you look at the intraspecies difference between males and females, it's relatively marginal, and this is no different in humans. While it may be true that on average men have a distinct physical advantage over women, the integration of any sort of technological tool into this equation pretty much voids these physical limitations in anything short of a one-on-one combat situation. Now, all that said, we must also be careful not to overestimate the capabilities of women in these scenarios, as that too can be dangerous. While Hollywood has spent the better part of a century exaggerating the abilities of male superheroes, it also in recent years has created misleading depictions of women in these roles as well. For example, movies showing 5'5" heroines blazing through a half dozen 6-foot tall 250-pound males after the apocalypse is equally misleading. It's also the case that as society becomes more culturally and socially hermaphroditic, men themselves also tend to resemble less so the archetypal male and more so the unisex metrosexual style male whose masculine characteristics have also been rendered nearly obsolete by the technological advances of society. So in terms of personal security, women must, on the one hand, acknowledge that there are these inherent physical differences in order to be able to leverage that strategically. For example, many men are going to drastically underestimate the capabilities of women, and they may do so to their own peril. Women have at their disposal the constant element of surprise, and while they may be the target of exploitation and predation post-SHTF, they are also going to be extremely underestimated in their capabilities by those same people. And this is something they could potentially use to their advantage in navigating those types of situations. Women also have at their disposal the pursuance of men, and there is nothing stopping them from feigning innocence and inviting wanting men into fatal traps. And when it comes down to survival, all bets are off and anything's on the table. In essence then, man's advantage over women is very one-dimensional. brute strength, and perhaps some occupational acumen, as men would be working in jobs like trades that might be in greater demand post-SHTF, whereas women may be more inclined to work in jobs that require a fully functioning society in order to support. This phenomena was actually depicted in the TV series The Last Man. You see, when all the men died, the majority of jobs that were required to sustain the critical infrastructure needed to run society were left, for lack of better terms, unmanned. And this required a collective effort of the women who survived to fulfill those roles to keep society operational. So women's advantages are perhaps less tangible under such dire conditions, but they also have the capacity to be more Byzantine and Machiavellian. Our own preconceptions and stereotypes about people can put us at an extreme disadvantage when it comes to survival and preparedness. The goal of all survivalists and preppers should be to view the world as objectively and impartially as possible in order to assess everybody on their own merits, while accounting for the tendencies and statistical differences between the genders and the sexes. The goal of this talk was to show that in socio-technological regression, women would not simply regress into the role of a domesticated breeder who was completely subservient to men. Rather, they will make vital physical contributions to any homestead or self-reliant community. It was also to show that while women may make these contributions which might exceed the expectations of many, we also cannot remain oblivious to the inherent physical differences between those who identify as women and men, as this will absolutely be a factor in terms of personal security in a highly combative post-collapse environment. Let me know your thoughts on this matter in the comment section below. Please keep the discourse as respectful and civil as possible. Thanks for watching Canadian Prepper.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.